First sorrow. A trapeze artist. This art, practiced high in the domes of the great Verdi theaters, is acknowledged to be one of the most difficult ones within man's reach. Had arranged his life at first simply out of perfectionism, but later also from the force of a habit which had grown tyrannical, in such a way that he remained for the whole period of each engagement, day and night on his trapeze. All his needs, which were indeed very modest ones, were supplied by relays of attendants who kept watch below, hauling up and down everything that was required on high and especially constructed containers. This mode of life gave rise to no particular difficulties as far as the general public was concerned. It was merely somewhat distracting that he should have stayed aloft, as was impossible to conceal, while the other acts were in progress, and although he mostly kept still at such times, he would attract an occasional stray glance from the audience. The management forgave him this, however, because he was an exceptional, an irreplaceable artist. And of course, they appreciated that he did not live like this out of mischief, and that this was in fact the only way he could keep in constant practice. But it was also healthy up there as well. And when during the warmer months the side windows all round the dome were thrown open, and with the fresh air the sun came flooding into the gloom of the interior, it was even beautiful. It is true that his social intercourse was limited. It was only rarely that a fellow acrobat clambered up the rope ladder to join him, and then they would sit together on the trapeze, leaning out to right and left on the safety ropes and gossiping. Or there might be workmen mending the roof who would exchange a few words with him through an open window, or the fire officer inspecting the emergency lighting on the topmost balcony would cross to him with some respectful but almost unintelligible remark. Otherwise all around him was still. Occasionally, some stagehand, having perhaps wandered into the empty theater of an afternoon, might gaze thoughtfully up into the almost impenetrable height, where the trapeze artist, with no means of knowing that he was observed, was practicing his skills or resting. The trapeze artist might have been able to go on living like this undisturbed, had it not been for the inevitable traveling from place to place, which he found exceedingly painful. Of course, his business manager saw to it that the trapeze artist was spared any unnecessary protraction of his sufferings. In the case of local moves within the same town, racing cars were used, and they tore, preferably at night or in the early hours of the morning, through the deserted streets at breakneck speed, though always too slowly for the trapeze artist's consuming impatience. For railway travel, a whole compartment was reserved, in which the trapeze artist could find some kind of substitute, however wretched, for his normal way of life by spending the journey up in the luggage rack. In the next town to be visited on the circuit, the trapeze was in its place in the theater long before the arrival of the trapeze artist, and in addition every door leading to the auditorium had been flung open, every gangway cleared, yet even so the happiest moments of the manager's life were always those when the trapeze artist ultimately set his foot on the rope ladder, and in a flash, at long last, was hanging once more above from his trapeze. Despite the number of journeys that the manager had already brought to a successful conclusion, each fresh one was still a trial to him, for these journeys, apart from anything else, were clearly playing havoc with the trapeze artist's nerves. So it happened one day when they were again on the move together, the trapeze artist laying on the luggage rack dreaming, the manager leaning back on the window seat opposite reading a book, that the trapeze artist suddenly addressed him in a low voice. The manager was instantly at his service. The trapeze artist said, biting his lips, that from now on he must always have for his performance, instead of just the one trapeze as hitherto, two trapezes facing each other. The manager at once consented, but the trapeze artist, as if to show that in this case the manager's approval was as irrelevant as, for example, his opposition would have been, declared that henceforth he would never again, in no circumstances whatever, perform on just the single trapeze. The very idea that such a thing might happen seemed to make him shudder. The manager, hesitant and watchful, once more emphasized his complete agreement. 2 trapezes were better than 1, and besides, the new arrangement would have the further advantage of adding variety to the production. Thereupon the trapeze artist suddenly burst into tears. Deeply alarmed, the manager jumped up and asked what the matter was, and getting no answer, he climbed onto the seat, stroked him, and laid his cheek against him, so that he too was bathed in the trapeze artist's tears. But it was only after much questioning and many soothing words that the trapeze artist sobbed, "Only this one single bar in my hands. How can I survive like that?" Now it was somewhat easier for the manager to comfort him. He promised to send a telegram from the very next station to the next town on their circuit about a second trapeze, reproached himself for having let the trapeze artist work for so long on just one trapeze, and thanked him and praised him warmly for having at last brought this error to his attention. And in this way the manager succeeded in slowly pacifying the trapeze artist, and he could return to his window seat. But he himself was far from pacified. With deep anxiety he kept stealing glances at the trapeze artist over the top of his book. One such thought had begun to torment him. Could they ever wholly cease? Must they not steadily intensify? Were they not a threat to his livelihood? And indeed, as the manager observed him in the apparently peaceful sleep into which he had sobbed himself, he thought he could see the first lines beginning to furrow the infant smoothness of the trapeze artist's brow.